Okay, so the negatives seem to be holding us up a little bit. So let's do some more examples. So we're going to evaluate this for f equals -9, p equals a -2, and q equals a -11. Give that one a shot, see what you can get out of it. Okay, so let's go ahead and plug the numbers in, which is really the first and the most important step, is getting these numbers plugged in correctly. So tell me what to do here. Yep, negative.
3 times -11.
Oops, -11 for Q, sorry. Okay. Minus -2 squared times, parentheses, 7 minus -9. Notice, since each of these was negative, I did put parentheses around them when I replaced the letter with the number. Now at this point, we could just enter it in the calculator. I could just pull this up and say, hey, this is -3 times -11. Oops, come on. So -3 times, I'll put in the parentheses, -11, close parentheses, minus, then in parentheses, the -2, close parentheses, squared. Oops, go back there. There. Times, I do have to put that, I should put that times in between the p squared and the next parentheses there. So times, parentheses, 7 minus, and I'll put in the parentheses, -9. And now that I've entered that correctly, I hit equals, and it should just pop up as a -31. Now let's see if we can make it come out to a -31 if we do it by hand. If you do this on the test, by the way, that is acceptable. I would double check it by hand just to make sure, because it is easy to enter it incorrectly in the calculator too. If you do it by hand and you punch it in the calculator and you get the same answer both ways, there's a good chance you might have it right. So anyway, here we would start out in the parentheses and the enclosing symbols. 7 minus a -9 is a +16. Next, we have the -2 squared, which is a +4. Notice it's still minus in front here, though, even though it was subtracting that -2 squared, so that subtraction is still there. Next, we have -3 times -11, which is +33. And now you can either think of this as 4 times 16 and then subtract it from the 33, or you can think of it as a -4 times 16 and add it to the 33. It'll work out the same. I'm going to do 33 minus 4 times 16 is 64. 33 minus 64 is a -31. Which is what my calculator gave me, which is good. -7?
No,
97?
You know why? Because I seen that what he did, I caught that there. You gotta put the parentheses in.
I've done it twice with parentheses and without the parentheses.
No, before you do that square root right there.
The square, you mean?
Yeah, you
Yeah, hit the square.
And,
Yep.
and then I put parentheses in, or put the first one in, and then the -2, then square root.
Yeah, if you do that, it will.
And that's how I came up with 97.
Yes, that is exactly what it is because it would give you a -4 instead of a +4 there.
Put the parentheses in before you do
Yep.
the square root.
So here, let's walk you through step by step entering this in. So you're going to type in the -3 times, open parentheses, -11, close parentheses, minus, open parentheses, -2, close the parentheses, hit the x squared key. What's that? After the parentheses, yep. Times, open parentheses, 7 minus, open parentheses, -9, close and close. Does that work out better this time, Kinsey? Okay. That is the big thing. When you're squaring a negative, that squared must go outside the parentheses or it will screw you up every time.
You did that, I'm like,
Okay.
that's not right.
Yep. Those negatives are not, especially when you get subtraction or powers and stuff like that. Since we happen to hit on that, that leads us nicely into our next topic. So let's take a peek at it. Now we talked about this briefly. If I have to square a number, if I have to square a negative number, we must put the negative inside the parentheses and the power outside of the parentheses. So -7 squared, we would enter it in the calculator, parentheses, -7, close the parentheses, and x squared. You get +49. Any number squared will give us a positive. Because remember, a positive times a positive is obviously positive, but a negative times a negative is also positive. So since when you square something, it's always just taking it times itself, the result must be a positive number, no matter what the number is you're starting with. So if I have 3 squared, what's that going to be? 9, yeah, no trick question there, I swear. How about a -5 squared? That better be 25. When you square something, it is always positive. Because again, that means -5 times a -5. A negative times a negative will be a positive. Now, if it's not squared, there might be a difference. And we're going to come back and look at that in just a second. But because when we square something, it is always positive. If we look briefly at this symbol here, the square root of 9, we know that to be 3. Well, why is that? Well, remember, we defined subtraction as being part of addition, and we defined division as being part of multiplication. You know, technical definition of subtraction. 9 minus 2 equals 7, because if you work it backwards, 7 plus 2 equals 9. That's one of our definitions of subtraction. Or 12 divided by 3 equals 4, because if you work it backwards, 4 times 3 equals 12. Well, the same thing goes here. The square root of 9 equals 3, because 3 squared equals 9. There's a problem here, though. Is 3 the only number we can square to get 9? No. -3 squared also equals 9, doesn't it? So technically, the square root of 9 is 3 or a -3. There are 2 possible results. Now, in the real world, most of the time, unless you're dealing with my checkbook, we're dealing with positive numbers. So usually it is the positive result that we're interested in. For us, the main application that we're going to be doing square roots in is when we look at triangles towards the end of the summer. When you're finding lengths of sides, the length is always positive. You cannot have a negative length. So we're dealing with a positive result. But be aware that there are two possible answers when you square root a number. One positive and one negative. What would be the square root of a negative 25? You want to say 5, some might want to say negative 5. But what's negative 5 squared? Positive 25, right? Is there any number that we can square and give us a negative 25? No, because when we square something, it's always positive. If you tried to type in the square root of negative 25 in your calculator, what's it going to tell you? It says error, yes. There is no square root of negative 25. Because there's nothing that you can square that will give you a negative number. Now, I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek because if you were to get into an advanced algebra, they actually have a field of algebra called imaginary numbers, which is exactly that. They just imagined an answer for square rooting a negative, and they built a whole system around it. Yeah, we're not going to get into that because for us there is no practical application. In reality, the only practical applications for that are usually in electronics or in like exponential decay and growth and stuff like that. For you guys, if you were to get really far into the investment side of things, like in continuously compounding investments and stuff like that, then you would touch on it. But for most reasons, there's no reason why you'd ever need to work with it. Outside of advanced alternating current circuits and stuff like that, there is very little practical application. Okay, so you cannot square root a negative. Can't be done. What does that symbol mean, of course? 5 to the third power, which means it's 3 of those 5s multiplied together. So 5 times 5 is 25 times another 5 is 125. Is a negative 5 to the power of 3 also going to be 125? Not quite. There it is. We get a negative 125. And the reason being is you can multiply the first two. Negative 5 times negative 5 is a positive 5, but it's multiplied by another negative 5, which is a negative 25. When it's to the third power, it is possible to get a negative answer. The positive 5 to the third power was a positive 125. Obviously, a negative can't come out of thin air, so a positive number is going to stay positive when you take a power. But a negative 5 to the third power did give us a negative result. How about if I take something like negative 3 to the power of 4? Well, that's going to be 4 negative 3's multiplied together. Comes out to be a positive 81. If we go through it, negative 3 times negative 3 is a positive 9. Positive 9 times negative 3 is a negative. Positive times negative is a negative. 9 times 3 is 27. Negative 27 times a negative 3, well, we have a negative times another negative is a positive. 27 times 3 is 81. So negative 3 to the fourth power is positive 81. Ah, you caught the pattern. Even powers, always going to be positive result because there's an even number of them. The negatives cancel out as you multiply them together. If it's an odd power, it can be negative. only if the number you start with is negative, right? If you take a positive 7 to the third power, it's going to be positive no matter what, because you started with a positive. So if I have a negative 2 to the power of 11, without punching that in, will that answer be positive or negative? Negative, because it's an odd power. Should be a negative 2048. Try that on your calculator, see if it comes out.
So when you're doing an equation and you have, let's say, the same sort of thing, can you apply this to that as well?
Yep, that's going to be one of our next steps.
How do you do that again on your calculator to add the
So on your calculator,
change your square root from being a square to a different number?
well, okay, for a different power,
Yeah.
careful not to say square root, because it's not a root now, it's a power. Root is that symbol. So it's parentheses, negative 2, close the parentheses. Little caret key. On your calculator, it's probably over on the left side here. Looks like that. And put in the 11. Get it to work? Okay. So if we had an equation like this, x squared equals 9. If we're asked to solve it, we ask what's been done to the x. Well, here the x has been squared. What's the opposite of squaring something? Square root it. Just like if it's added, you subtract it. If it's multiplied, you divide it. If it's squared, you square root it. So this is going to be just x here, and the square root of 9. Unfortunately, when you have something like this, remember when you square root something, there are two answers. So x could either be 3 or it could be negative 3. This is one of the few times where you really should list both answers. If I give you y to the power of 5 equals 32, take the fifth root, of course. Now, you guys don't know how to take a fifth root on your calculator, so I'm just going to tell you that that is 2. 2 to the power of 5 equals 32 if you double check it. 2 to the power of 5 equals 32. So the fifth root of 32 is just 2. I don't expect you to be able to do those roots above a square root right now. But what I do expect you to recognize is something like this. If I say z squared equals a negative 64, don't punch it in your calculator though. I want you to look at it for a second and think. What number squared equals a negative 64? Why is there no solution? Yeah, 8 squared is going to be a positive 64. Negative 8 squared is going to be a positive 64. There is no number squared that would give me a positive 64. Now, on the other hand, so does that mean there's no solution for this one either?
No, there is.
Why?
Because the number's going to be a negative.
Perfect.
No matter what, if you add times a negative number by an odd
To an odd power.
it's going to end up being big.
Perfect. Because it's an odd power, it is possible to have a negative result. So there is a solution for that. Again, I don't expect you to be able to find it, but it would be a negative 3. Negative 3 to the power of 3 is a negative 27. All I expect you to know at this point is to look at that and realize this one cannot be solved and this one can. So, can it be solved or not solved? Careful. Let me finish the problem yet. But you had the right idea. Can that one be solved? Yes, because it's an odd power. How about that one? Yes, why? There's a positive here. Doesn't matter what the power is. When this number is positive, it's solvable. How about this one? No, because it's an even power, and I got a negative number here. An even power cannot equal a negative, ever. That's really the big picture that I want you to get out of that. That's the biggest concept there. Okay. Try that one quick. See what you come up with. So let's put the numbers in here. This is 9 minus a negative 5 times, parentheses, 12 minus 6 times a negative 3 plus a negative 5 squared, and close the parentheses. So if I were to enter this in the calculator, 9 minus, close, negative 5, close, times, open, 12 minus 6 times, parentheses, negative 3, close, plus, parentheses, negative 5, close, x squared, close. Oh, I screwed something up again. Oh, wrong symbol for the negative 5. How many of you got 284? A few of you. Good. So if we're doing that by hand, of course we start in the parentheses, and in there the power comes first. Negative 5 squared is a positive 25. Next, we have 6 times the negative 3, or a negative 6 times a negative 3 is probably the easier way to look at it. Becomes a positive 18, so plus 18. Then we have the 12 plus 18. And 30 plus 25. Then we have negative 5 times 55, which is 275. Is this going to be plus or minus here? Will be minus. So this is a negative 275, and this will also be a minus there. because negative 5 times 55 is a negative 275. And that does not affect this minus here. 9 minus a negative 275 is the same as 9 plus a positive 275, which is 284, which is what the calculator did. Okay, how are we doing? Your brain hurts? Well, the very good news is that is all of the new material for the test. So I'm going to end this recording and I'll start a new one for a test review.